Hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming. My name is Andy Stern. I'm the president of the Service Employees International Union and a longtime supporter of the Center for American Progress. And I was thinking to myself, I've actually never introduced John Podesta. So this is an opportunity that is only, what I will say, has only been reaffirmed by reading his book. John Podesta is a unique person in Washington, D.C. There are very few people, I believe, who have a combination of intellectual talent, who actually have a moral center, who have faith in their God, love their country, care deeply about people that work, and have spent every day of their life, whether in teaching or building organizations or providing support to elected officials, to try to live out those values in a real way. And I think at a time of enormous change in our country, John's book, The Power of Progress, of how American progressives can once again save our economy, our climate, and our country, is not just another political book, but is a book from someone who's probably as best positioned as anyone in America today to really think about the future. So first of all, let me welcome John Podesta and say thank you all for coming, and let's give him a round of applause. So John, one might wonder, after all the different things you've done in your life, why now did you write this book, and what are you trying to say at this moment of history?
Well, thanks, Andy. And I was thinking after you did the introduction, maybe I should just end the session here. But that was very generous, and I appreciate it. And just before we get started, I want to give credit to John Halpin, who worked with me on the book and is here someplace. He's kind of the CAP's in-house historian, and we'll get into this a little bit, but part of the book reflects back on the progressive history of the country, particularly in the early part of the 20th century, and what that meant for the country. But and John really helped me frame and shape that part of the book. But I think that we find ourselves, I think, in circumstances like progressive activists did at that time, stuck after 8 years of a failed conservative experiment. I like to think that President Bush got almost all the big stuff wrong, and it's put America in a place where family incomes are down, median incomes are $1,000 less than when I walked out for the last time out of the West Wing of the White House. 5.7 million more people live in poverty. That's a statistic that just came out 2 weeks than when President Bush took over. Just a few days, 5-6 days ago, we had a new job report that showed that this year alone we've lost 605,000 jobs. Unemployment rate went back up to 6.1%. More people are uninsured. We've got an energy crisis in the country. People are carrying all-time high debt loads. And I think that it was important to talk about that, to make the case about where the country is. But I saw something else, which was that I thought people had begun to lose faith that you could ever change things again. Now, I served in a president and in a White House in which almost the opposite of all those statistics were true, that there was a focus on the middle class, focus on job growth, focus on providing opportunity for people. But I really had a sense that there was a feeling kind of out in the country when I began the project that maybe we couldn't get particularly the national government to work on behalf of working people again. So that the historical part was in one part a reflection about how other people 100 years ago or more came together, activists, thinkers, politicians, mayors, governors, and confronted what was then the great disparity in wealth in this country, but, dubbed the Gilded Age. I think we're living in a second Gilded Age with the great disparity that we see in income and wealth again in the country, and to try to draw some lessons from that time, bring them up to date, and then apply them on the big global challenges that we face today on energy, on the economy, and on national security. And the book argues and puts out with some specificity what policy solutions are needed. But I think they are built on a record of progressive success in the 20th century, I think, during the administration I served in, and I think it provides a guide to where we need to go as a country.
So before we go to sort of where we need to go, it's interesting because you talk about serving in the Clinton administration, their commitment to a lot of the values you think are represented as a progressive point of view, but you go back actually and start a lot with Teddy Roosevelt. And you talk a lot about a Republican who, interestingly, John McCain kind of models himself after. So I'm just curious.
Well, claims to model
himself to model after. So I'm just curious, where does, it's, for someone who's sort of seen as a very strong Democrat, there's a lot of talk about Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, I think that I think particularly at the beginning of the 20th century, I think you look at where the ferment in progressivism was. It was definitely in both parties, and maybe even stronger in the Republican Party, starting with governors like Bob La Follette and Albert Cummins in Iowa, but then picked up by Teddy Roosevelt. I've watched as McCain has kind of grabbed on, and now we see ads. He's the Maverick. There's a different history to the name Maverick. Maury Maverick was a great New Deal congressman from Texas who was about as far away from John McCain as one could possibly get in their political philosophy and what they tried to do for the country. Actually his grandfather, who was a mayor of San Antonio, for whom the term Maverick is coined. But to the Roosevelt point, Roosevelt sort of started off as a conservative in his politics in New York. Became I think he saw the social injustice that was being created by the great concentration of wealth and power in the trusts and in corporate America in the United States. He moved progressively to the left, I would argue, to become more progressive, particularly in domestic affairs. I mean, maybe McCain and Roosevelt share a little bit of similarity more on the foreign policy side. But in domestic affairs, by the time he ended up running on the Progressive Party ticket in 1912, it was maybe the most progressive platform that has been put forward to the American people. 8-hour workday, workplace safety, ban on child labor. They put forward a tax on inheritance, a graduated income tax, conservation in terms of preserving our natural resources. So his trajectory was from a person who came from power and wealth and saw, I think, what it was doing, particularly to working people in the sweatshops in New York and in the farms around the country, and moved in the direction of trying to use the national government to restore democratic value, to restore social equity in the country. McCain's gone almost in exactly the opposite direction. I mean, he was a little bit all over the place after 2000. After his being beaten by President Bush, he tried to work with Democrats on at least a couple things, Patients' Bill of Rights, etc. By the time he ended up deciding to run, he endorsed Bush in 2004. By the time he ended up running again now, he's put what I think is arguably the most conservative platform, more radical than President Bush. His health care plan dismantles the employer-based system, leaves people in the individual market, leaves people with pre-existing conditions completely out in the cold, has no real answer to that. His tax policy he doubles down on Bush. I mean, he not only extends the Bush tax cuts for the very wealthiest Americans, adds $300 billion a year in tax cuts. More than half goes to corporations. More than half goes to top 1% of income earners. I think on issue after issue, clearly with respect to to foreign policy, as the administration in its final year has begun to sort of come to grips with what's happened around the globe and has become at least slightly more practical in certain regards. They've at least agreed to set a date for withdrawing the ground force, and that wouldn't be the date I'd set, but they've in Iraq. I mean, McCain seems to be, if anything, more neoconservative than Bush. So he's gone he swung at least from 2001, that period where he was, I think, thinking about running as an independent, hard to the right, whereas Teddy Roosevelt, who he claims to emulate, really swung to a much more progressive orientation and tried to deal with the great social inequality of his time.
So you have Roosevelt, as you're saying, with one of the most progressive policies, McCain sort of trying to claim the mantle. So what does it mean to be a progressive? You know, when we use those words, and how does it distinguish from being a conservative?
Well, again, I tried to draw out some lessons from that, and I think that the most important characteristic of progressive politics. The other thing I do in the book is I talk about my own life, and I mean maybe I focus so much on this. Other people go back and deal more from an American historical perspective, and their concentrations on the Founding Fathers and the founding documents, and obviously the Declaration of Independence sort of is embedded in the kind of thinking here. But my family wasn't even around in 1789. My grandparents all came here at the turn of the century. They were all penniless immigrants from Europe, from Italy, from Greece, and I think that my father was a blue-collar worker, worked his whole life in factories. I was chief of staff to the President of the United States. That's an extraordinary journey, but I think it's also an ordinary journey in one sense, that millions of people traveled in the 20th century in America, built around a core set of values that progressives brought to the table at the beginning of the 20th century, which was to really focus on working people, on providing opportunity for every person. It was a long struggle through the 20th century, but trying to provide equality for every person in America, focusing on the common good rather than the special interests, taking on great concentrations of wealth, and in the international sphere, a focus on expanding and acknowledging human rights abroad and trying to build an architecture internationally of cooperation to try to bring, particularly in the post-World War II period, to try to bring together the democratic values and forces that were focused on letting people lead good lives into an international architecture that would both protect Americans at home, but also kind of extend an umbrella of peace and prosperity abroad. So I think that was really the progressive project, to focus again on opportunity for everyone, to focus on the common good. And the other thing I think that was characteristic of 20th century progressives, and I think it was characteristic of the president I served, and I think we need to bring that back, and I'm hopeful that we can bring that back in the next administration, is a real spirit of experimentation. Mm-hmm. Franklin Roosevelt characteristically being devoted to that, to trying things, to seeing what works, to trying to not be wedded and embedded into ideology such that it interfered with the ability to try to make government work for working people, and reform. And that I think those ideas, those values were, they created the great middle class in this country. They won 2 world wars, and I think they're what we need to get back to in order to meet the big global challenges we face today.
So a lot of people take the word liberal and the word progressive mm-hmm. and sort of switch them around. Mm-hmm. Some people call themselves progressives because they don't want to be called liberals, but obviously mm-hmm. both have a long historical tradition. And could you sort of draw out the distinctions in your mind? Yeah,
I think that there's a whole chapter in the book that tries to deal with this. I don't mind being called liberal. Mm-hmm. I feel extremely comfortable in the liberal tradition, and so some people think it's a political dodge and whatever. I think there are some distinctions between, and we tried. John and I particularly worked on this mm-hmm. on this chapter of the book together. We try to draw out the distinctions between classical liberal thought, which really focused on protecting human dignity, on the right of conscience, constitutional value, came out of the Enlightenment and was focused to some extent on the individual and the protection of the individual against government intrusion, and as well as for intrusion from societal forces, and that's kind of theoretical and philosophical and has a deep tradition. Progressivism in the 20th century perhaps a bit more, comes from a bit more practical tradition of just sort of seeing the great problems particularly in cities in this country, and trying to operate on a spirit of reform against them. A couple of things that are again, I think you could perhaps make too much of this, but there's some distinction. Was, for example, we note the different role of religion played in liberal thinking and in progressive thinking. Progressivism was built up really around a deep sense of applying moral religious values to the problems of the day. So the social doctrine theory of Walter Rauschenbusch, or Catholic social thinking that was applied was less probably put it a slightly different way. Liberalism was sought to protect conscience. The First Amendment is really embedded in liberal thought, whereas the kind of moral force of great religious leaders were more apparent in I think in the progressive movement. Progressives concentrated more on community, I think, and less on in theoretical terms and individual. But mostly, I think they were just they brought a spirit of practicality rather than trying to work out a deep philosophical construct. They said we got how are we going to get immigrant kids into public schools? How are we going to get people to learn English? How are we going to fix the sweatshops in the cities? How do we give people some power and rights to form unions? Particularly in that milieu of worker abuse. How do we make the world a little bit better? Franklin Roosevelt, I think, brought the kind of two streams together. So the progressive project and the liberal project, I think, are indistinguishable during the period of the New Deal and the Roosevelt presidency. I'm sure there are deeper historical thinkers than I who would probably disagree with those, trying to pull those threads apart, because there's so much commonality in the kind of two ways and the two approaches to it. But we saw some distinctions and sort of draw them out, just sort of that people would maybe reflect on that history that goes back to the founding of the country versus that history that goes back towards trying to create those great social movements at the beginning of the 20th century.
So, we had this progressive moment of history. You talked about the fusion of the liberal and progressive in Franklin Roosevelt. What happened? Where'd the country go wrong? When did the turn occur?
Well, I think it was, it carried on obviously through the Great Society, through John Kennedy, then through Lyndon Johnson, through finally liberals and progressives finally embracing the civil rights cause and the movement of civil rights in this country with great fervor, particularly in the 1960s. And I think that a couple of things happened. Obviously, I think that as President Johnson predicted, there was a great backlash to the expansion of civil rights in this country. In political terms, you saw the solid South become solid once again, but with conservative Republicans as opposed to conservative Democrats, I guess. But that changed, I think, the politics of the country. It changed the electoral college map. It changed the structure of the Congress. But there's no question, I think, that there was also a concerted effort by conservatives to delegitimize the liberal project, to try to fight what what progressives have built over the course of the 20th century. They're still at it. They're still trying to unravel and dismantle Social Security. They're still trying to kind of add, try to add privatization both on the healthcare side. I mentioned McCain's plan, and I think the kind of extension of that into Medicare is is kind of right around the corner. Certainly Social Security, and I think I think that they did that by playing on a sort of a nostalgia for a simple time, as well as a more hostile, tough, particularly racial politics, but also, like I said, I think they had a project of trying to delegitimize government. One thing I always give President Bush credit for, he said government was the problem, and he produced a government that was, in my mind, one of the great problems that the American public faces: corrupt, imploding, unable to do the job, and so they've gone about trying to create a self-fulfilling prophecy there. And I think that, again, it creates a political dynamic which I think needs to be taken on directly, and it's hard for us. But I think we need to argue not that we need a big bureaucracy, but that we need a strong government that's working on the side of the middle class and working people. And again, I think that history, recent history, renders a judgment about when you have someone who gets up and goes to work in the morning and thinks about how you help middle class people, how you help working people succeed. You get a different result than when you get somebody in the White House who could really, I think, never experience it, never reflects the values that I think are built up in this progressive sphere.
So 2 questions, then we'll go to the audience. So one is, you worked in the Clinton White House. You talk about in the book how you think there was an attention to progressive values, to the middle class. You just want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I put Bill Clinton directly in that history and in that spirit. There's a bit of a debate between the kind of center and the left about where Clinton fits in the in his own politics, particularly given his relationship to and his analysis about where the Democratic Party had gotten to, his relationship to the DLC, et cetera, and his positioning of the party as a new Democrat, and what did that mean, and what were its roots with respect to more traditional democratic values. It'll come as no shock to the people in the room. I love Bill Clinton, and I love working for him. And I think that, again, it goes back, and I reflect a little bit in the book on this. I think the one thing that, I grew up as a blue-collar kid, urban environment, northwest side of Chicago. Clinton grows up in Hope, Arkansas. But I think that Bill Clinton never forgot the people he grew up with. Mm-hmm. When he came to work in the morning, that's who he cared about. One could argue about and people argue all the time about individual policies and what they did, et cetera. But I think the proof's in the pudding. I think that he raised the minimum wage, he expanded the earned income tax credit, 23 million jobs were created. I mentioned that people, working families, actually lost $2,000 of income. Median income's gone down $1,000 over the course of Bush's presidency. In Clinton's presidency, it went up by $7,000. Poverty rate was cut by millions of people. Child poverty rate went down to the lowest level in history. The African American and Hispanic poverty rates went down to the lowest level in 30 years. I think that was a focus and a concentration on making the economy work for working people. And I think that just to give I don't use this in the book, but I remember in December of 2000, after Bush v. Gore, after it was clear we were leaving the White House, we might be in the similar circumstance this year. The Congress still had not passed the budget. They had kind of stalled because they didn't want to pass the budget in advance of the election. The congressional leadership came down to the White House to resolve the final budget for whatever it would have been, fiscal 2001. We were sitting there with Trent Lott, Hastert, Army, Daschle, Gebhardt. Resolved the remaining issues, got a big boost in public education once again, other kind of priorities that Clinton wanted. Everybody was getting up to leave, and he grabbed Hastert by the arm. He said, "One more thing." This is now like right before Christmas in 2000. We're 3 weeks from leaving the place. He said, "One more thing. You know, Denny, you and I went out to this on what we called New Markets Tour, the places that have been left behind, Indian reservations, rural America, cities that needed more investment." He said, "You and I both believe we ought to invest, provide more tax credits for these, left behind places in America. Why don't we just do that? It's only $20 billion tax cuts. You like tax cuts." And Daschle said, "It's fine with me." Gebhardt said, "It's fine with me." And everybody looked at Trent Lott, and he said, okay, I guess I can go along. And, it was like right to the very end, that's what motivated him. It wasn't because they were going to build a monument to, new markets for him someplace. It was just that he knew that if you put some money into Harlem, where he now works, or into Chicago, where I grew up, or into rural America, or on an Indian reservation, it means something to people's lives. And I think that, people fight about welfare reform and fight about trade policy, etc. And I think we learned some things over the course of time there. But I think that there was no question that what got his juices flowing was trying to help people in a very real sense, that putting people first line from the '92 campaign just is who Bill Clinton is.
Last question before we go out. So the punchline of the book is how American progressives can once again save our economy, our climate, and our country. So how do they?
Well, I lay out some very specific ideas and proposals. That's largely the part of the book that comes from the work that my colleagues do here at the Center for American Progress. We see, just start with one, we see energy transformation from a high carbon to low carbon base not only deal with the short-term energy challenge that we face from imported oil and what the havoc that the run-up in the price of oil has done to family budgets. We have a crisis on energy right now that has security dimensions and economic dimensions, but it'll pale in comparison to the global warming crisis the country will face. I noticed the CIA just put out a new report. It was in the paper this morning, making this point that this is going to be a primary focus of our security challenge in 2025. We see that not only as meeting the challenge, though, on energy and climate, but as a central element of what the president's next economic policy should be. That energy transformation, innovation, job creation ought to be built around a new clean energy strategy. CAF just put out a report yesterday that was a commission paper from that showed that $100 billion investment early in the next Congress could produce 2 million jobs. Wow. On building reconstruction, wind and solar power, the kinds of things that could really provide long-term sustainable base for our economy, put people back to work, cut the unemployment rate, and so as people are thinking about stimulus or growth package, we think that that's one place where we need to concentrate effort. On the economic front, we clearly need to move to affordable quality health coverage and get people focused on wellness and disease prevention and disease management. Get the cost of healthcare down overall. Right. You and I have worked a lot on that. We need to restore the power to form a union. We need to raise the minimum wage. We need to focus on fair tax policy that provides tax benefit to the middle class and particularly the working poor in this country. And then in the international sphere, obviously we need to restore America's standing in the world, and we lay out some specific ideas about how you redeploy the ground force from Iraq on a more timely basis, make the right kinds of investments in our military to reset and restore the effect of that, focus on Afghanistan and Pakistan, but then rebuild the alliances around the world to face the big global challenges that we face. The security problems in the United States are not just in Baghdad. They're across the globe, and they're global in nature, and we need to spend and concentrate more time on making what our friend, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright calls the United States the indispensable nation, not the bully nation, not the go-it-alone nation, not the preemptive war nation, but the indispensable nation that does, again, what the Progressive Project did in the 1940s, which is to create the stronger architecture internationally that will create a global middle class and create more stability and peace in the world.
So now it's your turn. The only thing we ask is that you identify yourself, and Christine's going to come around, and we got some hands up here. Christine, you can.
Is this on? Oh, hi. My name's Pat Salisbury. I'm with Executive Intelligence Review, and I would like to ask both gentlemen from the progressive standpoint to address what I consider to be the 10,000-pound gorilla in the room, which is the recent Treasury takeover of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It's very clear to anyone, such as my publication, that studied this, that this is a straightforward bailout of financiers, speculators, and hedge funds, and has nothing to do with dealing with the problems of families and the general welfare of the population. I believe that both of your organizations have endorsed, and I could be wrong, correct me, the congressional authorizing legislation, which would be the Frank-Dodd bill. So what I would like to do is invite you both to break with any support for legislation that enhances the financial oligarchy at the expense of the general welfare of the population, to denounce your association with individuals such as George Soros, who promote this perspective. So, I would invite, I'm coming to the end,
thanks.
the SEIU to begin acting like an actual trade union organization, and both of you to join with Lyndon LaRouche in calling for an end to bailouts of speculative institutions, repeal of Dodd-Frank, and putting forward the firewall policies that will protect the general population in this crisis. Gentlemen, I'm eager to hear your reply.
All right.
Well, our institution is focused on trying to help, not help the large financial institutions, but help homeowners face the problems of default, and that's where we've concentrated our effort, and that's where we're going to continue to concentrate our effort, which is.
Hold on. Can we just let him answer, please?
Which is to provide the right kind of resources to cities and communities, and the right kind of ability to keep people from defaulting on their loans. I will not sit here today and denounce what the Treasury Department just did. I think it's important to get answers to the questions that, for example, Senator Dodd has posed to the Treasury Department. I think that the shareholders look like they're getting wiped out in this, and the question is what happens to the bondholders. But there needs to be stability in the housing market. We need to keep people in their houses, and there are practical ways. We wanted to see more in that Dodd-Frank bill than was there, but I think what they did in terms of trying to provide neighborhood stabilization to keep people in their homes and keep the default rates low was good.
And we'll go to the next. I'm just here to be the host. I have no answer,
Well,
right? I'm just being the moderator here, so I'm going to call on the next person. Go ahead.
I'm Jack Leibowitz, just a progressive citizen. I think all your aims really rest very strongly on winning this election for Obama. And if you were advising him, what changes would you make in his campaign? What advice would you give him that would give him more strength in campaigning?
Well, I wrote a couple hundred pages on that topic, but I guess what I would say we've been through a week or two where I think the focus has been on McCain and Governor Palin. I would say to the Republicans seem to want to make this campaign about lipstick, so I would say that no matter how much lipstick you put on a pit bull, you can't gloss over the results of the policies that they want to extend for 4 years, and they're the results that I described at the beginning of our conversation. And I think that the more that Senator Obama can make this a choice about change, but what path we're on with respect to change, the more I thought he did actually quite a good job of that in this convention speech. And the more he's back to that, and this race turns from being American Idol to a debate about, and I don't discount the fact that personality is important in politics. It's not just about issues or this or that. You need a narrative about where you want to go and whether the people there are able to get you there. But I think he's shown enormous leadership qualities, and I think he's got to get back and really focus on what he wants to do, what it's going to mean to working people, and what the extension of Bush's policies, which is what McCain's promising, will mean in the lives of ordinary people. And I think I remain hopeful that the country is poised to take a progressive turn. We saw that in the 2006 elections. I think we will see it in the 2008 elections. And I think that as I said, the premise of your question is we have to win to get this stuff done. I see people getting the kinds of ideas done all across the country. In state houses and cities, and I think ultimately that has to happen with somebody in the Oval Office who cares about working people the way I think the two of us do, and I think great change can happen as a result. But in terms of, I don't. He's done fine without my advice, and I think he'll do fine in the future. But if I had to give advice, it'd be go right there.
Behind you, I see some hands. Christine.
Thank you. I'm Daiwa Lapade. I'm with the New Republic. I have a question. You've mentioned in your book that climate change, in your view, is the most demanding problem confronting America today. I would certainly agree with that. My question is how you can fold public support for ideas like healthcare, which is a problem for industry, which is a problem for energy as well. If you look at car companies in Michigan, for example. The question is twofold. How can we get support for an initiative like healthcare involved in the conversation on energy? And which of those two major issues do you think the next Congress would tackle first in terms of an order of operations?
It's a great question. The sequencing question is particularly one I think that's on people's minds these days. My view is that we don't have the luxury to do one before the other. This was a great debate during the Clinton years, on healthcare reform and welfare reform and which you do first and where do you build your political capital. I think the reality is that the U.S. economy is in a place where a new administration has to, I think, try to tackle them both simultaneously. There are some ideas that have been put out, one led by one of our senior fellows here, Bracken Hendricks, on the so-called healthcare for hybrids idea, which is to to provide some relief, particularly to the U.S. auto industry, in exchange for retooling to build a more efficient, cleaner automobiles, and to try to create somewhat of a direct linkage between the energy transformation and the innovation that I talked about and relief on the healthcare side. I think ultimately that that may have some promise, but I think the business community in general, I think, is in a somewhat different place, and it's why I'm hopeful that we can do both things. I think they see the need to tackle the healthcare problem in a way, particularly those companies that are exposed to global competition. They see the need to not just defer to the insurance industry or the business roundtable or the kind of lowest common denominator, but to really try to get reform moving in the broadest sense in the American healthcare system. And I think that that's different than it was in 1993. I think that while there was some business community interest in healthcare, they're largely deferred to the providers, to the insurance companies, et cetera. The famous Harry and Louise ads. I don't think that'll happen in a new Congress or with a new administration. I think that the cost of healthcare and the place of healthcare in it's one major substantial part of the strike that just is being undertaken at Boeing by the machinists. The need to have a new system that's more balanced, that's going to reduce costs overall for business, that's going to provide health care for everyone, but is so strong that I think a new and a different kind of coalition can be built. The energy problem, again, I think has to be tackled from day one. I think people see these things as competing in the legislative arena. I think there's also the capacity, particularly on the energy side, for the president to organize their administration through executive authority to be able to begin to move this implement the kind of policies that I've talked about in the book. So I think they're going to have to be tackled in tandem. They're going to have to be tackled from day one. They're that and getting growth back in the economy that's more fairly distributed. And again, I see these two things as being building blocks of getting that kind of fair growth back in the economy are the big domestic challenges for the country. I know Andy's being the moderator, but maybe I'd invite him
No, I mean,
to talk a little bit about healthcare.
I'd only add to just what John said. I think we're at a very different moment. I think the country's ready for change. Business is ready for change. We saw in California a moment where in the largest state in the country we almost had change, and it wasn't because that business or labor or consumers were, fighting with each other. We just couldn't get quite enough to get it over the top. And I thought it was a good demonstration that people are looking for practical solutions that cut costs, increase quality, and improve access. And I just think we're almost at that moment that a president could organize this conversation with all the stakeholders trying to solve the problem instead of take care of themselves. We got some people up here. Let's grab it on the way up. Why don't you grab that person? Then we'll grab the gentleman with the white shirt.
Thanks, Frank Clementi, a political consultant. John, it seems Republicans have had a narrative for the last 20 or 30 years that they're able to go back to on and on to tap into public opposition to the Democrats. On the other hand, the public seems to favor the issues that the Democrats support, particularly this day and age. So I'm wondering if you've come up with your 20-word narrative for the Democratic Party that maybe some issues, maybe some other more value-oriented things that become something that the public will resonate with the public for the next generation.
Well, I'll be slightly reflective again on the Clinton era. I remind my colleagues of this that when Clinton lost his candidacy for presidency, he gave 3 speeches at the I'm going to come around to answer your question, and gave 3 speeches at Georgetown, which were called the New Covenant speeches. No one knew what that meant, but it had a bunch of ideas in it, and he went through a series of variations on that until they settled on putting people first. It was really that more than it's the economy, stupid, that I think framed the election and got what people were talking about. And so I don't know that I don't know that I'm the great narrator, or I'll leave that to my friend Paul Begala to kind of figure out what the narration is. But I ran through some of those values that I think really have to be at the heart of the Democratic message, and that is opportunity for every person and providing the capacity for everyone to lead good lives, to expand the circle of opportunity, and to focus on the common good instead of the narrow self-interest. That's at the heart, I think, of progressive values. I think that's at the heart of democratic values, and I think that you need a program that implements that theory of the case, that it's not enough just for the very wealthy to do well. This country was built and made great by focusing on working people, on middle-class people, on ordinary people. That's what created, I think, the great movement in America, and that's what led my family to lead the American dream, and millions of other families to lead the American dream. We got to get back to that core set, I think, of economics, and as I said, focus on giving people the opportunity to lead good lives. And I think with that, I'll leave it to the speechwriters to get the 20 words or the 7 words on the bumper sticker.
A gentleman up here in the white, and then the woman in front of him. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Chris Myers-Ash with the U.S. Public Service Academy, and we're working on an initiative to build a civilian West Point to attract a new generation of young people into public service, and public service defined as the public sector. And so I wanted to ask you, you were talking about this idea that if you say government is the problem over time, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, not only because you cut funding for agencies, but also because you discourage the next generation of young people to see government as a noble way to spend your life. So my question to you is, what specific legislative proposals can the next president do to reinvigorate our sense of public service and attract a new generation of young people to go into government service?
Great question. I think that there's been a lot of focus on getting people into the NGO sector, and to try to into things like AmeriCorps, like the Peace Corps, like expansion of the ideas about how to kind of focus the social entrepreneurs by creating a White House office to focus on that. But that sort of begs the question that you're raising, which is if I think that this generation of Americans is I would like to say in a sense more progressive. They're definitely more focused again on the common good and giving something back and social service. The question is, do they see government as an expression of that, or do they really only see service in NGOs or voluntary in the voluntary sector, in the initiatives that are going on through philanthropic efforts, etc., as being the highest and best expression of that? I think that I don't know whether I have an answer to your specific question, which is what legislative proposal would actually get you there. I think that some of this is about how one creates a role model for that, which is by making government more efficient, effective, and delivering the goods, I think inspires people to be called into service. Clearly, I think expansion of programs like AmeriCorps and Peace Corps, which are kind of crossover programs, and I think have some role to play. But I'd be interested in maybe turning the question around, not in this forum, but hearing from you what your ideas are about that.
One of you. Let me go over here.
Hi. Hello, I'm Anita Gallagher with Executive Intelligence Review. And I think there's a real obstacle to progress in this bailout, which has just been passed. Because if we don't have an economy, we can't have progress. And the issue is the people on the street don't think that this is something that's going to keep homeowners in their home. They think this is a blank check for the banks, which is absolutely an unlimited bailout of any piece of mortgage-backed securities that anybody offers. Now, why not go the way that Franklin Roosevelt, whom you praised and we would all praise, why not go the way that he went and say we're freezing all of that speculative capital? We don't know what it's worth. We don't know if it's worth anything. We're going to freeze it. We may write it off. Our fundamental interest is keeping people in their houses. Because if we don't freeze that, then we have a situation that makes 1923 Germany look like small potatoes, and nobody's going to do anything.
We, around December last year, proposed doing what he suggested in terms of creating a government mechanism to buy up mortgages that were, in essence, underwater and refinance them in terms of long-term mortgages where property values had dropped. I think that we've now heard two of you out, and I think we just need to move on.
No, I appreciate that, but let's let some other people talk here. I appreciate that very much. All right, well, everybody's going to get their chance. Christine, there's a woman there with her hand up, I think. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Poplin. I'm a visiting fellow here. Why are we having so much trouble getting our message across? In the 8 years, the economy has tanked. This is supposed to be the best year for Democrats in living memory. And the race is and Obama is articulating exactly the things that you talked about, and they're the right things. Why is it that the race is dead even?
Well, we can, I can give a long dissertation on politics. I think that the reality is that we're in a moment in which McCain has had a couple of good weeks. He's been able to not wear Bush as much as I think he deserves, and I think it's our job to try to remind people that whatever the hard nut that the press gives him around being different and a maverick is belied by what he actually says he's for. I tend to take him seriously. I think some people in the press tend to sort of decide that he doesn't really mean what he says because he's a better person than that. I don't know. I mean, I'm not challenging whether he's a good person or a bad person. I'm just saying take seriously what he says he's for. If you take that seriously, then I think that the dam will break and I think if people are faced with the choice of 4 more years of going down the road that the president has plowed or 4 years of moving in a progressive direction, I have pretty good confidence that they'll choose the latter.
Can't see. Do we have any more hands? Last question. Over here, the gentleman over here.
Hi, my name's Jonathan Reinich. I'm a master's candidate at Johns Hopkins up at SAIS. And this is sort of what this woman over here touched on. Again, I think that the audience would like a little clarification as to why all of these very, very, very real problems seem to be getting very, very lost at a very, very urgent time. Again, I hope I'm not. I see a lot of nodding heads, and I just, given that both of you are such authorities on this subject and have been through, especially you, Mr. Podesta, this before, I think delving a little deeper into that issue would provide some answers that the audience is looking for. Thank you.
You know, but you're asking me to kind of explain the campaign that I'm not that ought to be directed at somebody who's directing the campaign. I think that there's, I think that's to some extent, it's the structure of the of where we stand in the electorate today. There's been endless chatter about McCain being able to consolidate his base, but I think really what both questions sort of point towards is the structure of the media as much as the structure of the campaign, and how politics is covered, the way people engage in dialogue, the fact that the story that I guess in the Post yesterday or today about you can just get on TV, repeat and repeat and repeat the stuff that's not true, and you pay relatively little price for that because the line keeps being put on television. There's sort of a story in in factcheck.com that gets picked up in the Washington Post, but the television, it tends to be repetitive. They're pretty good at knowing how to run those kind of campaigns. Ultimately, I think it's up to the other side to combat that and to get the story out. But there's no question that maybe, I don't know, Andy, pick your number. 40%, 42% of the country don't see the world the way I see it. They think they're on the other side of the deal. So the country I don't think it's evenly divided, but there's 40% of the people are on their side. And I think that the question is what's happening in the middle with independents, with people who are kind of less engaged in the politics of the moment. And I think that we do have a kind of structural problem in our own politics in the way how much money counts, how much the media has been, particularly the mainstream media has been been moved towards cable chatter rather than real analysis, and but that's the facts of life, and I think those are facts of life that the Obama campaign needs to deal with and overcome if they want to win.
Well, I just think we should.
I disagree
I'll get
with
out of
that.
my moderator role just only for a second to say, and then thank John. That campaigns have life cycles to them, and I think if we had this discussion 3 weeks ago, right after Joe Biden had been selected, everybody would be feeling great. We had a Republican convention with a very unusual pick for vice president that refocused a lot of things not on the issues that are important to us, and that will run its course. There's only so many rallies you can see with Joe Biden or Barack Obama or Sarah Palin and John McCain before people start thinking back again to what's my family doing. But I just think we should not judge the last two Republican convention, incredibly unusual choice for vice president that reframed the press and media into a different frenzy. We will have 3 debates of the president. We'll have 1 debate of the vice president. And as the people were saying about whether it's Fannie Mae or anything else, nothing is going good in America. We're at the end of the worst government in American history. We should not let 2 weeks of fanfare of a series of events that occurred make you think the next 60 days are all going to look like the last 2 weeks. They won't. And America will get back to paying attention. And then, as John said, it is important that people make the case about progress and progressives that John made in his book. So let's thank John for making that case. Let's hope Barack Obama makes that case. And thank you for being here.